It's my pleasure today to be interviewing Professor Rajmohan Gandhi, who's out visiting the ANU under the Distinguished Visitors Program of the Research School of Asia and Pacific. Professor Gandhi is a distinguished scholar and a prolific author, currently research professor at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He's a former parliamentarian, a campaigner for human rights and conflict resolution, both globally and on the subcontinent. And if that's not enough, he's the grandson of both Mahatma Gandhi and C. Rajagopalachari, the first Indian Governor-General of India. Rajmohan, welcome to ANU.
Thank you very much.
We're really delighted you can be here with us. The range of topics on which you've written is extraordinary, and you're giving a series of lectures while you're here with us today. This week, I should say. One of your themes is a comparison between one of your grandfathers, Mahatma Gandhi, and Abraham Lincoln. The American author Adam Gopnik has drawn an interesting comparison between Lincoln and Darwin. Mm-hmm. But the Gandhi-Lincoln comparison is a fascinating one.
Yeah.
Interested to draw you out for our viewers on what you see as some of the comparisons between them.
Well, there are some superficial similarities that are very obvious. Both were assassinated on a Friday. Mm. Neither was considered good-looking. Both of them made jokes about their appearances. Each of them had a very strong belief about what they were meant to do. And but I find that each of them gave their deepest for the toughest challenge the country faced. The deepest for the toughest was a hallmark for both Lincoln and Gandhi. And of course, both of them faced this great question of how to keep their country united. Mm. Lincoln succeeded. Gandhi, in his case, did not succeed. But the challenge that the two faced was very much similar. And then again, as far as Lincoln was concerned, there was the unity of the United States and slavery. As far as Gandhi was concerned, there was the independence of India, the unity of India, and untouchability. Mm. So there were these great range of issues and somewhat similar issues that both had to tackle.
There's some similarities. You drew one point of contrast there, in a sense, on one dimension, success in the United States on holding the country together, and division in the case of India. Would there be any other significant differences you would highlight between them?
No, I think I can't really think of any other major difference in their life or in their achievements. Mm. Yeah.
Let's jump to the present.
Yes.
What would your grandfather, either of your grandfathers for that matter, what do you think they would have to say about where India is today, and more broadly where the subcontinent is today?
So I would say I can speak maybe here for both of them, would be very glad and grateful that hundreds of millions have indeed risen above extreme poverty. Mm. That has happened in the last 15, 20 years. Mm. So it's a matter of very great satisfaction to everybody, and I imagine it would be also to Gandhi and to Rajagopalachari. I think where Gandhi would be very unhappy with is the nuclear bombs of India and Pakistan. The great division between Pakistan and India, as well as the enormous levels of corruption and the great worship of money. I think these would greatly pain Gandhi. But the fact that there is democracy on paper of a fine kind, and even in practice of an impressive kind, would certainly hearten him. That the last person of whom he often spoke, the poorest person, at least on paper is given a fair amount of importance in India, and in practice also often gets attention. That would also hearten him. So he would be pleased on some counts and very disappointed on other counts.
One of the issues you touched on there was corruption, which I know is an issue that is passionately discussed in the Indian body politic, as it is in the body politic of many countries, and part of this country at the moment too. Do you have a strong sense that that's a greater problem in this era than it was in the time of your grandfathers?
I would say yes. Of course, in the time of my grandfathers, for much of the time, India was ruled by the British, not by Indians. Gandhi lived for 6 or 7 months after Indian independence, and already he was beginning to speak of the corruption that was taking place, and was very pained by it. The last fast he undertook shortly before he was killed, one of the issues there was his discovery of corruption among some Indian politicians. Corruption has always existed in every society throughout time, I think. But now perhaps the scale has increased in some ways. And also there's greater awareness, of course, greater public knowledge of it, exposure of it, which is highly desirable. So maybe not all the change is in the actual scale of corruption. Much of it is in the scale of the accounts of corruption that are available for everybody.
Shifting the focus, Raj Mohan, you've also written extensively and spoken on many occasions about relations between India and Pakistan, relations between Hindu and Muslim. What's your sense of where that great issue stands today on the subcontinent? And give us some sense of your feelings on where it's heading.
I see both trends. I see some very encouraging trends in both countries. And I would like to believe that that is the dominant trend. There's also a negative trend of polarization, some kind of extremism on both sides. But I expect the more positive trend to win out in the end, but not without some very serious challenges in the coming years. The majority, in my assessment, and this is of course not based on tremendous investigations with lots of data, lots of opinion polls, is that the vast majority in both countries, Pakistan and India, the vast majority of Hindus, the vast majority of Muslims want coexistence, want partnership, want cooperation, but there are extremist groups on both sides, and they are often able to intimidate. As we know, this is true in so many cases. But I have made many visits to Pakistan, and as far as my research is concerned, my current research, which should be published before the end of this year, is about the history of Punjab, which of course is now part of it in Pakistan, part of it in India. And the division of India and the great killings that took place in 47 were mostly, they occurred in this Punjab region, the Pakistani part of Punjab and the Indian part of Punjab. So there too I find, even though these terrible killings took place in 47, about 500,000 people were killed, a great many lives were saved. Many more lives were saved. And literally tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of individuals, Muslims, Hindus and Sikhs, took part in protecting, concealing, enabling safe passage. So that too is part of the reality, and I take some heart from it.
Let me explore those historical themes a little more and link back to the earlier point of comparisons between Mahatma Gandhi and Lincoln.
Yes.
The American Civil War and the Great Revolt of 1857, half a world apart, similar time periods. How do those two narratives compare?
Yes, there was very great killing. Of course, we all know that the American Civil War took more American lives than were taken in World War I, World War II, Vietnam War together. And the 1857 revolt also took a great many lives. Many British were killed, and a much larger number of Indians too were killed in the reprisals. And in fact, according to some historians, the United States at that time, very interested in what was happening in India, because there was some trade between India and the US, and people were afraid there that if the revolt were to succeed, this trade would suffer, the import of tea and of sugar to the US would suffer. But also there were other questions. And the stories of the British who were besieged in Lucknow and how they were relieved by Havelock and other British soldiers. Although there was a lot of anti-British feeling in the United States, after the initial reaction, which was of some sympathy for the Indian rebels and of a lot of criticism of the East India Company that was governing India at the time, when the word of the killings of English women and children reached the US, opinion completely changed and was solidified. And all of America, North and the South, already there was a great division in the US over slavery, but all of America was united in rooting for the British rather than for the Indian rebels. Even though the number of Indians killed was many times more, maybe 100 times more than the number of British people killed in India at the time. It was interesting that in the US the opinion was that the entire civilized world had to stand together against what was at that time seen as Asian barbarism.
Extraordinary, isn't it? So it's on the one hand debates about liberty, and on the other hand debates that seem to point towards race in the end.
Well, some notion of what race or what civilization was, kind of debatable notions.
Yeah, extraordinary. Traversing history, we've spoken of colonialism, we've spoken of India's path to nationhood and independence and to modernity. You live and work these days in the United States.
Yes.
From that vantage point, how do you see India's path in world affairs?
Yes, I think this is
in the present time.
Great question, and India is certainly emerging economically, and in other ways also is quite influential. And because of India's numbers, India is bound to play a large part in world affairs. So it's very important for India to figure out what India's role should be, how India should serve humanity, what is the responsibility India should assume in so many issues in the world. So these are very important questions. And I do feel that in some of the great divides in the world, for instance, there is this divide between the so-called Muslim world, which is hardly monolithic, but it's there, and the so-called Western world, which again is not uniform. But in bringing these two great parts of the world together too, India and Pakistan together and Bangladesh together might have some kind of a role. This is some kind of daydreaming, you might say. But I definitely feel that for India's own survival, the Muslim, non-Muslim issue has to be really satisfactorily resolved. And then India has to help resolving that in the world as a whole.
Let me change direction and seek your advice on something, or your counsel. Among major research universities around the world, certainly research universities in the English-speaking world, this university quietly prides itself on having the largest single concentration of scholars dedicated to learning and knowledge about Asia and the Pacific. We've got a substantial corpus of scholars working on India, but like everywhere in the world, including your current country, the United States, we're looking to expand that.
Yes.
Somewhat like the United States, when Australia's thought of Asia for the last 50, 60 years, it's tended to think of what we might broadly call Southeast and Northeast Asia.
Yes.
Pacific Asia, if you will.
Yeah, sure.
And we're broadening our conception belatedly to get a much clearer view, much deeper view of India. When you look at universities around the world, what advice would you offer as they seek to enhance their ability to contribute towards learning about and knowledge of India?
Well, I think the first obvious thing would be to recognize that the greatest issues or most urgent issues are not necessarily those that are funded very easily. This is a great dilemma that all research universities face. And I would say that the India-Pakistan situation, the Afghanistan-Iran situation, so if you move from Eastern, Southeastern to South Asia and to the Western Asia and the Middle East, those are all very, very crucial places that affect the future lives of everybody. Even the great environmental issues are present in these countries in much greater intensity, because these are more arid places. They have less water than Eastern Asia has, or much of Eastern Asia has, Southeast Asia has. So for a number of reasons, this South Asian and what we in India call West Asia or the Middle Eastern part is just absolutely central to the world's thinking. And the other complication is that people from, say, Pakistan, India, people have very sharp opinions. They express these opinions all the time. So consensus is not always easy to achieve, so a great deal of patience is required. But there is tremendous potential there too. So I'm very grateful that you asked this question, and I would just love it if ANU can expand its focus on South Asia and the Western Asia.
Well, that's perhaps a tidy note to end on, because I can give you an unequivocal commitment that that's exactly what we're going to be doing.
I'm very happy to hear that.
Raj Mohan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Andrew.